start now. Yeah, a big thank you to Yael and Danny for making this happen. Thank you for being here, and I've been waiting for a long time to finally meet you, if only online. Yes, I mean, events are unfolding. There are new ideas floating around how to end the Gaza war as currently in the meeting between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump in Washington. We'll see what will come out of that. But there have been events and dynamics unfolding for a couple of years now in Israel, starting with what's usually being labeled as the judicial coup and the mass protests since then, which then were kind of disrupted by the October 7 terrorist attacks and the unfolding Gaza war and all the destruction and annihilation and happening in Gaza since then. And of course, including all the suffering of the Israeli hostages in um, who have been held captive by Hamas fighters. So, and for this, we decided we bring in several proper Israeli perspectives or perspectives from Israel by two great scholars, and I would like to use this moment to introduce the two of you. I'll start with Yael. Yael Berda is associate professor in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. She has been researching and teaching on law and politics and society, on race, bureaucracy, and the state. She did her PhD at Princeton University and was then also a postdoctoral scholar at Harvard. Interestingly, she did not start her career as a sociologist, but in law, and also had worked already as a human rights lawyer. She supports initiatives through her board positions like A Land for All in Israel. And among her many publications, I would like to refer to just a couple, most prominently her two books, her two monographs. One being Living Emergency, Israel's Permit Regime in the Occupied West Bank, published with Stanford University Press in 2017, and Colonial Bureaucracy and Contemporary Citizenship, that was in 2022 with Cambridge University Press. And then very recently, several co-authored articles like A Historic Junction, The Israeli Left After October 7 in Dissent in 2024, and then very timely, just now in 2025, also co-authored A Theory of Annexation, and that was in the Oxford Journal of Legal Studies. Danny Gutwein is an associate professor emeritus at the Faculty of Humanities at the Department of Jewish History at the University of Haifa. And he has been working for many decades on socioeconomic issues and political economy in Israel, and in particular on the Jewish labor movement and its transformations, but also on the history of international politics and Zionism. And among his many publications, I would also like to quickly mention a couple, one being Jewish Diaspora and the Privatization of Israeli Society, that was 2008 in the edited volume Homelands and Diasporas. In 2017, the settlements and the relationship between privatization and the occupation, that was in the volume Normalizing Occupation, and especially I would like to highlight the politics of the Balfour Declaration, nationalism, imperialism, and the limits of Zionist British cooperation, which is actually how I came across Danny, because I had this text as a mandatory reading in my class on the history of Israel, Palestine, and that was last semester, which is really a great and makes for an insightful read. So big thank you to the two of you for being here. And as I announced, we would start with two input statements from your sides, and then we could have maybe a brief discussion among the two of you and my questions to the both of you. Before then, we would open this session to questions and comments from the audience. Yes, Yael, why don't you begin with your statement, with your input?
How long do I have?
8 to 10 minutes.
Okay. So I think one of the things that for me was an interesting moment. I want to go back to before October 7th was trying to figure out what was the basis for the judicial overhaul. Like what was it really trying to do? And there was one aspect that no one was talking about. Um, I'll start with saying that for me, despite the fact that the mass protests did not include protesting the ongoing occupation of Palestinians, um, and the fact that it did not include Palestinian citizens of Israel, I still saw it as an extremely hopeful moment because it is a moment when Israeli society showed that it has a life wish. So to me, it was a very important moment, despite my uh, almost oppositional or orthogonal attitudes that then the leaders of the protest movement. But one thing that wasn't spoken about was was this and a goal that I think is a major goal of the judicial overhaul. I wrote this in two articles, one that came out in Hebrew and one in English, in summer of 2023, and it's that basically the reform was geared to slowly but surely denaturalize Palestinian citizens of Israel. And so I want to talk about that because I think it's a way to bring together the relationship between the judicial overhaul and the ongoing war in Gaza and ethnic cleansing in the West Bank. I don't say those words lightly. This is what's happening every day as communities. There's a fight around Area C. I don't know how much the group knows because you're a small group. I'm gonna assume that you know a lot, that you know a lot. If you need me to explain what each thing is, then just intervene, and then I can know that I need to explain.
Maybe quickly, just
Okay, so right now there's a fight on the land and to the death, basically, um, on Area C. The West Bank is was divided in the Oslo Accords into three areas. Area A, that was supposed to be uh, from the security perspective and the civil perspective under Palestinian Authority, Area B that is civilly under Palestinian Authority, and from the security perspective under Israeli Authority, and Area C that both the civil and the security perspectives are governed by Israel, besides social services that are by the Palestinian Authority, and that's the major area where there's clashes between Palestinian villages and towns and settlers, um, that their stated goal is to rid Area C from Palestinians, um, and to take it over. Now, this is not a conspiracy theory, or it's not something that we need to figure out. There's a major movement called the Sovereignty Movement that calls for the declaration of sovereignty immediately in Area C. There's various opinions about what needs to happen in Area B or in Area A, but Area C is very clear. And what's happening is that small villages that have limited resources and protection are being chased away by uh, groups, like groups of settlers, sometimes backed by the Israeli military, sometimes not backed, sometimes prevented to some degree. But what's happening is through threats and burning and stealing and all this, and that where basically there's some areas where there's like one last village standing. in that particular area. So the West Bank is also part of this um, uh, um, program. It's important to keep in mind that the program that that religious Zionism is holding on to or promoting is called the Decision Plan or the Decisive Plan, Tuchnit HaHakhra'ah. And in it, there are basically three options. One option is full surrender of Palestinians and basically letting go of any national aspirations or collective aspirations or self-determination in any way. The second is the possibility to leave or death. So I know it sounds dramatic. It's just that's just the way it is. Um, okay, so back to the naturalization of Palestinian citizens of Israel and why I think this is a major goal. One of the things that I couldn't figure out is when you look at the Supreme Court and you look at the legal advisors to the ministries, which are really the major targets of the judicial reform, you say to yourself, wait a minute. There's a certain, right, there are limitations that they provide. They definitely prevent corruption in many ways. There are certain measures of equality and universal principles that they do promote. But at the end game, it's a very strange thing. The Supreme Court has only, you know, annulled 22 laws in its entire existence. Um, Many of the ministries have a negotiating relationship with the legal advisors. I mean, they have fights about things, but there's one aspect that is very clear, and that aspect is that those holding on the most significantly to the green line and to the separation between the state of Israel and the occupied territories is the Supreme Court and the legal advisors to the ministries. Why? Because of the extreme consequences of having a situation where sovereignty is declared on across all the land, um, the consequences of annexation, and basically kind of the awareness of how rule of law in Israel is intrinsically and inherently related to having some form of international law govern the occupied territories, even if that form is what I call international law Israel's version. So if it's the Supreme Court and the legal advisors that are upholding this separation, one of the most important ways to uphold that separation is to differentiate between Palestinian citizens of Israel as full-fledged citizens with full rights and the subjects of the occupied territories, which are either stateless or have, a political membership in the Palestinian Authority, but that there's a major difference there. And when you look at the recent years, in the last 20 years, when you go, for instance, to Knesset committees, when you go to ministerial committees, there really is no place to articulate or to question what are the rights of Palestinian citizens of Israel, how are they upheld, um, and kind of provide a space for negotiation on those rights, because this is basically how those rights are achieved. They're not given. If in the discussion time we can get into why. But in recent years, I was in a few Knesset committees where the where when there's Palestinian members of Knesset, there's literally people from other parties, especially right wing, that are telling them go to Syria and go to Gaza. Go to Syria and go to Gaza. You don't belong here. There really is no space for that discussion about the political membership of Palestinian citizens of Israel, about um, how to resolve the complexities that come with that identity. And you might say, wait a minute, this is a very minor issue. Why would it be so important? And first of all, I mean, we are talking about a minority that is 18 to 20% of the population. Um, and my political scientist Yoav Peled, already for the last 20 years has been speaking about the ways that the rights, that the differentiation between the rights of Palestinian citizens of Israel and Palestinians in the occupied territories is being slowly erased, be it through policing or through other kinds of governmental relationships. Okay, but there was one place where you could still have that conversation about um, Palestinian citizens of Israel and their rights, and that was the Supreme Court sitting as the High Court of Justice. And in some of the ministries, because the legal advisors were interested in upholding the difference between the Israel, Israel proper, as it's called, and the occupied territories. And it is precisely that differentiation that I think the reform is after. And I don't have that much time to go into it, but I would just mention two very important uh, building blocks on the road to the overhaul. Um, and one is in 2016, there was an anti-terrorism law that was put in place that was supposed to be a replacement for about 80 years of using the emergency defense regulations left over from the British Mandate. These are regulations from 1945, extremely draconian, um, that basically enable the suspension of many rights and affect freedom of movement, administrative detention, and house demolitions, many things. And the anti-terrorism law was supposed to do away with those old mandatory regulations and bring in a shiny new parliamentary law that would be, an original piece of legislation. But in formalizing um, the legislation, what actually happened was that the draconian regulations remained, but they were not. But they were now they could now be more legitimately used on all the population, not only on Palestinian subjects, but also on Israeli citizens, including Jewish citizens. And when I claimed this a few years back, I had reviewers say to me, "Oh no, this is not going to be used against Jewish opposition. We know this for many years. There's that differentiation." And I said, "I think this is where it's going." And we do see that progression as the authoritarian coup moves along. Um, but first and foremost, the targets are um, Palestinian citizens of Israel. We could see it directly after October 7th, the fact that there was no possibility for any dissent whatsoever in the first months after the attack. Um, and what I think is that this relationship between um, creating this legitimacy to treat the population as a pro-terrorism population, and this is something that you hear the right wing saying a lot. They learn that they can't yell death to Arabs, because that triggers even the mainstream center, but they can yell death to terrorists. But what they mean is that all Palestinian political action is in support of terrorism. That's one thing. The second thing, I'm not going to get into it. I just want to mention it. The Nation State Law 2018. For many, it seemed like a performative law. It doesn't make that much difference in practice. All these things are already in practice. But I think that these types of laws are, in a way, the biography or the autobiography of the state when it tells you what it wants to be. And in that exclusivity of self-determination, you can kind of hear the echoes of the decision plan and the echoes of the fact that of the demotion. The Arab language was demoted, and in many ways, I think that it's another step towards the demotion of the citizenship of Palestinians in Israel. So I'm going to stop here. I said a lot of things, but I wanted to relate these different issues that are usually left aside, and we can go into it more after in the discussion.
Hey, great. Thank you so much. Danny, feel free not to stick to that 10-minute limit if you
Sorry, I'm sorry.
like. All good. All good.
Okay, good morning. Further to Yael words, and in paraphrasing von Clausewitz, I would say that wars are the continuations of domestic politics. And in order to understand the current Gaza war, what's happening in Gaza today and in this period, we must understand some facts of Israel domestic politics. And I would say that in this perspective, the Gaza war is the continuation of the judicial coup that the Netanyahu government has brought about in the beginning of 2023. Now, in order to understand the judicial coup and the war in Gaza, we have to understand something that is very profound to Israeli politics, and that is the special nature of Israeli populism as continuation of of the Israeli version of neoliberalism that pursued by the Israeli right. And now I would like to make something of all of it. Now, what is the challenge of the Israeli right? The challenge of the Israeli right is the fact that most of its voters are coming from the lower income deciles of Israeli society. And that's on one hand. And on the other hand, they are pursuing a very definitive neoliberal policy that hurts the very same voters. So this paradox or this contradiction is at the bottom of the politics of the Israeli right, mainly the Likud. Now, from 1977 on, the Likud had found some way to square the circle. And they began with what I would call they dismantled the welfare state, they privatized its services, but on the other hand, they built some compensatory mechanisms. And the term compensatory mechanism is central to my analysis. Now, what is the compensatory mechanisms? I would mention two of them, or three. One is what we call in Israel sectors. For example, the ultra-Orthodox, the Haredim, as we call it in Hebrew. They have different set of laws. For example, they're exempted for mobilizing to the IDF. They are getting their separate school system, funding by the state, but not under the supervision of the state. And they have many, many other benefits that were given to them as ultra-Orthodox, and protected by their presence in the Israeli Knesset, in the Israeli parliament. Now, that is one compensatory mechanism if we make allowance for the fact that when you are speaking about Haredim, about the ultra-Orthodox in Israel, you are speaking mainly about poor people. That is, poor people in Israel as an option to get a compensatory mechanism by joining, and that is ongoing process, the ultra-Orthodox vicinity. And now, another compensatory mechanism are the settlements. Now, you can speak about the settlements from the point of view of international politics and so on, but I would speak about settlements from the point of view of social politics. Now, while the right wing in Israel has dismantled the welfare state on Israel proper, as we call it, it built a somewhat or as a replacement for this welfare state in the settlements in the Western Bank and formerly in Gaza. Now, what are really the settlements? This is cheap housing, while all programs for public housing in Israel were ended. You have a program from public housing in called settlements. So people who can't afford themselves to buy apartments in Israel are emigrated to the Western Bank or the occupied territories and buy their apartments. And well, what is the difference between the prices? Third, you can buy or you could buy in the settlements apartments at 2/3 from their price in Israel. So the settlements, as seen from the Israel inner politics, are basically a compensatory mechanism that obscures the difference between occupation and inner politics or domestic politics. And that is the second compensatory mechanism. Now we have sectors and we have settlements. Now, as the Israeli welfare state was dismantled, it became clear that the settlements and the sectors can't serve all the Israeli population. So in 2009, when Netanyahu came back to the primaryship of Israel, he formed a third compensatory mechanism, and that the compensatory mechanism of loyalty. Very simply, to portray it simply, it was publicly stated that if your city supports Likud in the elections, then the government will give you benefits in many ways. So supporting the Likud became a way of replacing the welfare state or way of distributive mechanism. Now we have three compensatory mechanisms here. We have loyalty, we have settlements, and we have sectors. Now, it became clear that all these three compensatory mechanisms are undermining Israeli democracy. And it was clear for years that somehow they will become to clash with the Supreme Court. And what the right wing in Israel wanted was to neutralize that clash by changing the rules of the game. And it is the judicial coup. What the judicial coup did, well, the initial idea was to transform the Supreme Court into an auxiliary of the right-wing policies. It became the protest movement that developed in Israel through the last years has somehow interrupted this course, but we are on. But the judicial coup is going on. Now, now we're going back to the settlements. What the Judicial Coup did is to make the interest of the sectors, and mainly of the settlers and the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox, to make them the rule of the country. Israel is ruled basically nowadays by the interests of the settlers and the ultra-Orthodox. And one of the main goals of the settlers, as they are sitting in a government that is a sectocracy, as I describe it, Israel has become from democracy to a sectocracy. What is a sectocracy? Is a country that is ruled by the interest of the ruling sectors, not by the overall population. Now, one of these ruling sectors are the settlers. And the settlers, as Yael have told you, are going after the decisive plan. Now, what is the decisive plan? The decisive plan is the fantasy of the settlers to have a rule of Israel all over the West Bank and Gaza. Now, from that point of view, you can see that you have the Hamas attack of the 7th of October, of course, had gave the chance. The murder and the rape of thousands of Israelis had triggered the war. But the question was, what are the aims of the war? And I would say that in Israel, from the very, not from the very beginning, but from at least from the second month of the war, that began a question, what are the goals of the war? Now, the goal, as the settlers were sitting in the government, are portraying these goals as the decisive plan. So what we are having is that ongoing war that under the cloud, under the news from the war, what we are having is the decisive plan is implemented both in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank. Now, why this analysis is important? This analysis is important because it creates a connection between Israel neoliberalism and the current war and the occupation in general. And by looking at this connection, you can find a way from, I speak from as an Israeli citizen, from one who is active in Israeli, somehow active in Israeli politics. This gives you a way out of this policy. Because if you understand that all the sectorialization of Israel, the loyalty laws that Yael spoke about, making loyalty to the Likud, to Netanyahu as a factor in distributive policies. That makes the distributive policies as the main issue in changing the regime of Israel. So the question is, from my point of view, is not just to say, see, what we are doing is what we are doing in Gaza, what we are doing in the Western Bank is horrible. It's a way how we change it. And I truly believe that the way to change it is by suggesting a different or an alternative to the compensatory mechanisms. And the only alternative that I can think about is some kind of a renewed welfare state. So we have in Israel two sets of conflicts. One is a conflict that's going on about the foreign policy, the war policy, and the second one is the inner one about welfare state versus compensatory mechanism. Now, what's the problem? The problem is that what is called the Israeli left is basically neoliberal. And it is, I would say, the great catch of Israeli politics. That's because of the neoliberal tendencies of the Israeli left. And you could see it in in the what we call the change government, the government that was formed by Netanyahu's opponents that conducted an ultra-Thatcherite policy. So what we have in Israel is that the left is neoliberal. As a neoliberal left, it can suggest any alternative to the distributive policies of Netanyahu, to the social policies of Netanyahu. And that's why the Israeli left is not really an alternative as it is. So from my point of view, or from my own understanding, the way out of the judicial coup, out of the occupation, out of the war, the Gaza war, and so on, begins with a struggle to change Israel domestic politics. And that, I would say, is not a conflict only between the Israeli left and the Israeli right. This is a conflict within the Israeli left itself. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Danny. Thank you to the both of you for these input statements. Now, Yael, Danny just said there is a way out of this through I don't know, new understanding of socioeconomic policies, of a new understanding of welfare state politics. Now, you had a different take from your perspective on that. Could you connect to that, to this link that Danny set up between neoliberalism, what it means for the welfare state, the compensatory mechanisms, and that this should logically now also open up a new policy perspective that you can counter that by offering a remedy for these social issues?
I absolutely agree with Danny on this aspect. I just think it's not enough. I think with it, one has to have an actual plan for how we're coming out of what's become the Israeli regime. And I think that the way out of it is by having a political solution that will provide self-determination to Palestinians, that will enable also regeneration and possibility for mutual growth. And so, I mean, I'm moving like I have to move from my academic to the political because this is where our conversation is going. I'm part of a group called A Land for All, Two States, One Homeland, and we're working towards. It's actually a movement of Israelis. There's a movement in Israel and a movement in the West Bank. We had a branch in Gaza, but it is no longer. And it's a movement that works towards creating a confederation, but in which there's two independent states with freedom of movement. And a major part of any viability for this has to do with um, with uh, um, with welfare state policies in Israel, with living wage, with minimal social right guarantees within the Confederation. I mean, it's very obvious that the economic factor is critical both on the national level and on the joint level. And it's something that it's not that we haven't figured out. It's just so nobody think that I have in my pocket an answer for this. But I think that there's no question that if, I mean, we currently do not have a Jewish opposition in Israel. I mean, the opposition parties do not serve as an opposition, not politically, and not also, and for sure not economically. And so there's really no way out other than what Gutwein is suggesting. But I think that we can't think of the social and economic without the geopolitical solution that demands a different kind of organization. And I mean, it makes it harder, but in a way, I mean, it's we've I think many of us. I mean, no, I think I teach Gutwein's article on the privatization and the settlements in my course called Society in Israel. and it always gets chosen as one of the two most important articles in the course that changes people's minds. And one of the problems is that most people have no idea of these connections. They do not know. And I think that one of the ways out is to be able to offer a different kind of vision, both for the Israeli regime and for Israel-Palestine as a whole. And as far-fetched as that sounds in this terrible, dark abyss moment, and I know how that sounds, I don't think there's a way out to think separately about these issues. So that's where I am on that.
Uh, Now, Danny, maybe also to you, so that the left has a structural problem with neoliberalism as politics and also as a set of ideas in these past decades is visible in many countries. Now, you interestingly refer to these Israeli specialties on that mix because you have that territorial compensatory mechanism that you usually do not have in other cases, at least not in Europe and North America or so. But so this is a struggle within the left or so, but can you maybe complete that picture a bit how these within left debates on these issues then look like? And this again, among the left in Israel, you try to, like Yael said, make people hint at these connections. So how do these debates within the left then usually look like? And what is it about the war that makes this, I don't know, even more complicated or, I don't know, not feasible and not likely to, I don't know, produce a new set of ideas out of that or a new political vision out of that kind of.
Well, first of all, I would say that I completely agree with Yael about the two-state solution. That's so obvious that I didn't mention it. How the two-state solution will come about, that is left to see. But let's speak about the Israeli left, which is the question is that the Israeli left is losing in elections. This is the very simple fact. In order to change policies, in order to go on with this solution, in order to do anything, you have to be in power. And the Israeli left is not going to be in power unless it can discuss, it can have a dialogue with some of the right-wing supporters from the lower strata or from the lower deciles of income and so on. This is the critical part of Israel. What's make Israeli politics or the hold of the right in Israeli politics is so firm is the connection between the right wing with the lower classes through the compensatory mechanism. Now, the Israeli left is composed mainly of the upper classes. If you look at the results of the elections in Israel, you will see that the upper classes are voting for the left or for the center left. And because this policy of compensatory mechanism and privatization, they're nearly neoliberal and they are afraid of losing their privileges. Because if you have to suggest a welfare state, higher taxation, universal education and universal health and universal houses and so on, they will lose their privileges, which are capital privileges. So the Israeli left is entrenched in policies of privatization, neoliberalism, while preaching, on the other hand, democracy and true state and so many other things. And there is no connection between these very nice announcements or policies and the actual ability to bring them into reality or to realize them. And unless So the Israeli left, it's very nice, and I support it wholeheartedly. Two-state solution and rights to the Arabs and everything. But while they can't offer an alternative to the compensatory mechanisms, say, for example, there is a new party in Israel that is formed of what usually to be the Labour Party and the Meretz Party. Meretz was the Moldovish party in Israel. Now you can't. I suggested to them to proclaim that to suggest some social democratic manifesto. They're afraid of the word social democracy. They define themselves as liberal Democrats. And I tell them, you are going to speak about democracy in all your rallies in Tel Aviv, in Haifa. But there is no democracy only in the court. The democracy is also in education. The democracy is also in health. Democracy is also in housing. So you can differentiate. You can't suppose that people will uphold democracy in the court while being suppressed in housing, health, education, and so on. And this is a real class conflict within the Israeli left. A class between, I would say, the upper classes that don't want to surrender their privileges. And that's one of the conflicts or one of the campaign that we have to do within the Israeli left. Well, I'm engaged in it, but with no promising results so far. I would say something about what Yael mentioned, the nationality law. Yael, correct me if I'm wrong somewhere, about the judicial aspects. Now, what is what is this nationality law? In fact, it has many very little novelty in it. The main thing that is important from my point of understanding, the main thing that is important in this nationality law is that the law said that one of the duties of the government is to support Jewish settlements, not only in the West Bank, in Israel, in southern Israel as well. Now, when you say that the duty of the government is to support Jewish settlements, you say that the duty of the law is not to support not Jewish settlements. And when will lawyers will come to the Supreme Court now and will and will try to say that the Arabs are getting less, and we have to make some sort of getting the resources, giving equal resources, and so on and so forth, then the court will have a reason to say that the government is not forced to work and to give equal services and equal budgets to Jewish and Arab cities and villages. And so the nationality law, under the nationalism and so on, in fact, is a distributive law. Now, when the Israeli left is fighting the nationality law and speaking only on its national symbolic aspects and not about its distributive aspects, it's missing the point. So I would say that on one hand, the optimistic point of view that we do have a way out as far as I can see it. But the pessimistic point of view is that we have no real political force, or that we have to form, to establish this political force that will realize this connection between occupation, war, and privatization and equality.
Thank you for that. Before I open the floor, I have one last question from my side to the both of you, and that is on the immediate impact of the war itself. So I don't know, from reading headlines in newspapers for the first months, it seemed to be that, I don't know, socially, economically, this war seemed to be very disruptive. You know, thousands of people had to, I don't know, flee, stay away from their homes, etc., and couldn't work properly and all that. And then the idea was that maybe this disruption could first trigger more anti-Netanyahu, anti-government protests, but on the other hand, also maybe trigger some, I don't know, rethinking this whole mess and the approach of the government. But it seems to be that, I don't know, economically, socially, things are quite stable after that first disruption of the war. But here I don't know, asking for, I don't know, your more informed understandings of the immediate impact of the war itself, socially, economically, but then maybe also what that meant politically for organizing. Danny, you can go.
I can briefly say that I think that's where you really saw kind of the lack of opposition, because there is a moment. It was a moment where, on the one hand, there was an incredible support for the war from a military perspective, but you literally had, for something that people don't see, that didn't see from the outside, for about 8 weeks, the government offices did not provide the services that they were supposed to provide. What happened was municipalities, together with various NGOs, some of the protest movement, and some of the emergency services, were kind of patching up what needed to be done. And it took the government, I don't know, weeks, like a month to 5 weeks to even begin to do its work. And you really had tens of thousands of people that were, in different places. And we still, I mean, the peripheries, like the peripheries in the north, some of the most more like middle to lower class towns in the north are really suffering, because many of the people are not coming back, and there's no prospect for them to come back. Now, all this being said, it was exactly the moment for opposition to suggest reform and attack. They did not. They decided to uphold and support Netanyahu at this moment, and at that moment of real vulnerability, and and from that moment there's various possibilities. I think, I mean, there is still very low support for the government when you think about it, compared to the support that was, for the military campaign. But there is no real challenge, not in terms of agenda and not in terms of political power. And this is, unless the protest movement manages to get its act together and create a viable alternative, it's just not in sight.
As Yael said, Netanyahu is losing in the polls. According to the polls, if today there would have been elections, and Netanyahu's Likud will lose something like 10 mandates in the Knesset, something like. And maybe an opposition force will form the next government. But what is for sure that also the next primer, if not Netanyahu, the next primer Prime Minister of Israel will be also a right-winger. The name is Naftali Bennett. So we are here, and maybe we'll be more tolerant on the judicial coup. I don't know what he'll do according to the settlements, Gaza, and so on. So I believe that if I'm looking in terms of changing the policy, changing the the track of Israeli politics. If you make an analysis, a political analysis of where to begin with, and I'm for all the, of course, you have to make a vision to suggest an alternative vision of the future, vis-a-vis the Palestinians, vis-a-vis the Arab world, vis-a-vis Iran, everything. You have to suggest an alternative vision. But at the same time, the main problem is to persuade Israelis that there is an alternative to their own lives. Because what Yael told about people were neglected and thrown out. And at the same time, when your only alternative is NGOs, you understand that you don't influence politics. So I'm going back to my suggestion that the real alternative is not only two-state solution, is not only complete equality to Israeli Arabs and so on and so forth, is also an economic equality. And here you have the great catch of Israeli politics. If to be more optimistic, I think that more and more of the upper classes, because I'm many lectures around the country to various audiences, I could say that you can see within the upper classes, within the middle upper classes, an understanding that if they want to change something, they have to do it with the lower classes. And there is and there have to be some source of class compromise in Israel. And this understanding is the beginning. It's not enough, but it is a sort of a beginning.
Okay, thank you for that. And with that, we have another 30 minutes before we end this session. So I would now start to give the floor to members in the audience to pose their questions. We can start with live ones before I read the ones in the chat section. So now would be the time for you to raise your hand. Kressen.
Yeah. First of all, thank you very much for these inputs and for kind of giving us these insights. I sometimes, or not sometimes, but have the feeling that, especially in Germany, we're lacking kind of a differentiated discussion about what is going on in Israel, and especially also kind of opposition in Israel and kind of the voices you're representing. So I was just thinking that some of the things you mentioned, kind of the relationship between neoliberalism and kind of the far right reaping the consequences of this, is not unique to Israel, but what is quite unique is, I just mentioned it as kind of some of these compensatory mechanisms, especially kind of the settlements, which is something that we don't see in other regions of the world and also in Europe. And but I was wondering more right now in how the relationship then is between kind of the Israeli left and kind of other parts of the world. It's actually something, it might seem like a little question to you, but I'm actually, because I'm not aware of these debates within Israel, I'm thinking of how are the kind of, transnational connections, and how far is the Israeli left connected to kind of the left in other countries?
I could actually answer that, I think, fairly briefly. I think it's one of the big difficulties that there are. There is an opposition. It's small but extremely consistent opposition both to war and to ethnic cleansing in Israel. One of the biggest problems is also what is defined as left. And I think that a lot of times what is happening at this moment is that there's first there's like this template in which people need to adhere to certain kinds of principles, and only then they they are welcome to cooperate with other leftist organizations around the world. And this is a problem because even people who are, for instance, against occupation, for many people in Israel, using, for instance, the ideas of settler colonialism, using this, the kind of comparisons to Algeria or to other places where colonizers left. This presents a huge threat. So even if there are parts, I mean that's my research is on colonialism, and this is what I do, and I also think that it's a very important analytical tool and all this. But at the end of the day, it has to do with how those rhetorics work within the Israeli public, and the threat that those that perceive themselves on the left, you could say whatever you want about that. But there right now is a breakdown of language in which there's an isolation of the Israeli left to the point that sometimes borders on paranoia. So like I have to fight my friends who constantly are pointing to rampant anti-Semitism on campuses when I'm telling them that it's, you have to watch out if something is anti-Israeli or something is anti-Jewish, or what are the relations between these. I mean, there's a lot of complexity that goes into this, but that creates a lot of difficulty, and also the very big rift between what you call the Israeli left and Palestinian groups and groups that are pro-Palestinian liberation, that for many years have not been in conversation. So this is about 20 years of a lacking conversation in which only like a certain progressive group within Israel was in communication with the transnational movement for Palestinian liberation. And you can really see this in like the relationship to like the slogan "Free Palestine" and what people think it means, and how fearful they are of it, even on the Israeli left. For people on the Israeli left to hear "From the river to the sea," they think it's a cry for annihilation. And this is something that, one of the reasons for it is not just this moment; it's also the lack of conversation that was going on during the stagnation years of Oslo and its breakdown. And so that's where we are. I think that the best way is, I mean, I truly believe that we need help from the outside, in terms of creating the situations and conditions that will enable a rebuilding that is looking forward towards joint possibilities. I do think that pressure is necessary. And I do see very much kind of the difference between civil society groups and publics and governments. I mean, you see it in Germany, you see it in France for sure. There's other places, and I'm not just talking about just issues of protest, but actual thinking that of people trying to figure out what is the role of Europe and the European Union in this. What are the roles of the countries? And I think that's a really important conversation to kind of move forward and to connect with not only Israeli left, but also Palestinian left, which are decimated in this moment. And so that's also something to keep in mind, that those voices that are thinking differently about possibilities have to be upheld and conversed with. Nobody has to agree, but but there has to be a conversation, and right now it's just not happening.
Well, I'm more skeptical about the benefits of international intervention and pressure and so on. Take, for example, Iran. After the Israeli bombardments of the nuclear sites in Iran, there is a discussion in Israel whether these bombardments and whether the American cooperation, what they're doing within domestic Iranian policies. Are they supporting what you're calling the moderates that are saying, oh, see what is going, the world is against us, or just support the hardliners who say, okay, all the world is against us, and well, we have to keep with our hard line. I don't think that societies can be changed from outside. Or I would say it will be only an extreme examples for that. Normally, societies are transformed from within. And take example for Israel, you spoke about BDS and so on. The Israeli, you see, the Israeli from the lower middle classes are not impressed by BDS or not. They would be so. Normally, I think that these have a very, very low impact on changing Israeli policies. Well, it of course has some sort of influence, but to what is very important, and that is the changing of the Israeli electorate. It has a very minimal impact, and I would say that people internationally, people of course are expressing their views, and doing what they understand to be right. But the work to do is here in Israel. And I say what I suggest as distributive policies as the venue to overcome the historical majority of the Israeli right and try to form here in Israel a government that will be more central left or something like it, which is the only way to stop occupation, discrimination, and all these other things. I think that is work that we have to do here. Maybe help from abroad would be very beneficial on some aspects, but it will not make the difference. So I think it's in Israel like in everywhere on the globe. Until there are very few examples to the contrary. So it is our work, and we have to do. Support from abroad will be very beneficial, but the question is to what? I need support for a welfare state to understand the Israeli. I think that people who are troubled with the question how they will get their operation done, on people who are bothered whether they will have a proper house to live in the next coming school year, are less occupied with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And in fact, those who are giving them solutions, immediate solutions, and these are the compensatory mechanisms, wins their supports politically. So here we come back to the cornerstone, what I believe to be the cornerstone of Israeli politics.
Okay, yeah, let's invite another round of questions from the audience, but I would start with one. Around 10 years ago, the Arab vote the Palestinian vote in Israel was much more, I don't know, much stronger. There were several electoral successes it had in the 2010s, which um, even, I don't know, got people to either feel threatened, so saying we have to now contain also the electoral impact of the Palestinian vote in Israel, whereas the other maybe thought, okay, maybe they can be partners for I don't know, some collaboration, for some movement, but also for having some electoral block for legislation also. What's your impression? What happened with the Palestinian vote in these past 10 years? Of course, always in the course of the, those 4 rounds of elections that never established a proper government in the first place. But what's the that's also connected to the agency of Palestinian citizens of Israel right now. So how would you interpret and judge that?
So part of the decline in political power had to do with the fact that in these rounds of elections, because the issues were not directly related, I think that that was part of the decline. But there's other aspects, which is one of the things that is a major issue for Palestinian citizens of Israel is the rise of organized crime and the interlocking between organized crime and municipal power. And this is done either through negligence, some say through actual, promotion of these relationships by certain parts of the political of political leadership of the state. And this is something where, first of all, it affects people immediately in their lives. People sleep with guns under their pillows, and you'll talk to a dentist that says, "I think that I need to go buy a gun," because of that situation. So this is one very important aspect of it, and there's the question of the trajectory. What is the political trajectory? What is the possibility? Because there was in that small moment, there was a small government, the very neoliberal government called the Change Government. So there was the inclusion of Abbas, who was the leader of the Islamic movement, and but part of that inclusion meant that he said, "I am coming in, to guarantee the interests of my community, and we're not going to discuss collective rights at this moment. So this is not part of my political agenda." And in that sense, I think that also further created a crisis for the other parties that are very engaged in the collective issue and do see themselves as part of the Palestinian people, and more broadly defined. So it's hard to know what's going to happen now. I think a lot of people are thinking very pragmatically at this moment because of fear. Like there's a deep, deep fear that what is going on in Gaza and what's happening in the West Bank will arrive also to the Palestinian citizens of Israel. This is not something that is kind of just on the margins. You have op-eds, you have talks in which people ask themselves, will there be a second Nakba? So this is like, we're at a very critical moment in which, we don't know if people are going to go to fully pragmatic and trying to protect, land, property rights, or if there's going to be a further breakdown and disenchantment and disenfranchisement of more of the population. So it's right now, it's the crisis itself. It's hard to know.
Well, here I am somehow more optimistic than Yael. You know, coming from Haifa, which is a mixed town, and coming from a university, which almost 40% of our students are Arabs. And I somehow think, let's begin with one thing, that the Arabs should be part of the next Israeli government if it's formed by the central left, which is also a debate in the Israeli central left. Not in the left, but more in the center. But let's begin with this axiom that Arab parties should be part to any government that is formed not by the Israeli right. And from what I hear from my Arab friends, there is a hope that in the next election that the percentage of votes within the Arab society will rise. Let's hope that's right. But that's another thing. What is the source of enmity in Israel towards Arabs, among Jewish people towards Arabs? And why this enmity is less in the higher classes than in the lower classes? So attitudes toward the Arabs is also a class question in Israel. Because if people are you know, if people don't have fair services, fair education, and so on, so they are competing on them. They feel that they are competing with them, with the Arab population. Only last week, one of the Likud members of Knesset said that the Likud are getting the Arabs getting more than the Jews. So that's complete. That's incorrect. But why did he mention this? Because all the idea in a neoliberal situation, when services are privatized and not universal, so people are competing in a country where the compensatory mechanisms are working. So the Arab is a competitor. I would say that this is the first and foremost fact of Israeli politics regarding the Arabs. That's why in the higher classes, the sense of competition with Arabs there is less sense of competition with Arabs. So people are more progressive, to say, but it's only because of their economic standing. And people on the lower classes who are fighting for their rights, for their social rights, are in the mood of being of looking at the Arabs as competitors. So I see here as well, we want to find a way out of this inner Israeli conflict between Jews and Arabs. There is only way to make it or to downplay it by a more universal services that will make this feel of competition less dominant.
All right, thank you for that. We have maybe time for one final question from the audience, so I wait a couple of seconds whether that's happening. Okay, then I would say thank you very much, and we can also stop the recording. So thank you very much, Yael and Danny, for being here with us and helping us to get some more insight into these domestic Israeli dynamics, so we get at least some more light on these dynamics, which is rare to get one, as Kristen mentioned earlier. A lot of the stuff was really also new to me, and I think myself quite informed on Israeli issues. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.